And if you are new to WebEx, it is our state mandated program, and we do have a guide for new users. If there's anything that you have questions about, you can take a look at that.
All right, and we are now recording.
Awesome. Just a quick note before we get started. Again, like Brandon mentioned, we are recording and we are live streaming. So just be aware of that. And your videos are, of course, encouraged, but not required. And just feel free to stay muted. And at the very end, we will have an opportunity for questions.
All right, well, it is 4 o'clock, so we will go ahead and move forward.
Right. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Accessing Federal Funding to Support North Carolina Arts Education. We are so happy to have all of you here with us today, either live or watching this recording later. We are also live streaming to YouTube today, and you can access the recording there later as well. You can click on the link to the bit.ly that we are sharing in the chat, which is the link to your slide deck to follow along or access later if you wish. As we get started today, we'd love for you to think of a word that describes you or how you might be feeling right now or today that starts with the same letter as your first name, and share that in the chat with your name. So we have a few examples for you, like sentimental Sayward, energetic Elizabeth, hungry Howie, or bananas Brandon. Right, we see cherished Chuck and challenged Christy, positive Priscilla, scattered Sonia, motivated Monty, lucky Lynn, wise Wendy, loving Lori, we love you too, Lori, relaxed Ray, keen Kimberly, stressed Shannon, super Stephanie, judicious James, lethargic Laura, leaping Leanne. These are fantastic. Keep them coming in. And again, we are so happy to have all of you here with us today. And we like to take this moment just to kind of notice that we all might be in a slightly different headspace, and just to be aware and respectful of that. So thank you for sharing how you're feeling today and introducing yourself in the chat in that way. We'll take a minute to introduce ourselves to you. We are your arts education team at the Department of Public Instruction. My name is Sayward Gridley, and I am your dance and visual arts consultant for DPI. Brandon Rader is my team member, and he is your music and theater arts consultant. You'll hear from him in just a bit. And he and I work very closely together as a team on all 4 arts areas, so you can always contact both of us. And our section chief for social studies and arts education is Dr. Lori Major Carlin, and we'll just let her say a brief hello here.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this ugly afternoon. I hope that, well, I know that our team has some great information to share with you that will help bring the sunshine.
Thank you so much, Lori. And actually, on that note, we will just remind everyone that there's a lot of different weather happening across the state right now. So there could be power outages or internet connection issues. So just stay patient with us if anything freezes, and we try to jump in and cover for each other if anybody loses anything, but just we'll all stay really understanding of that for that moment. And thank you, Lori. We're super happy that you are here with us today, and we thank you for all of your wonderful leadership. We are also joined by a few special guests today for our panel, and we'll introduce them as we get to their sections. Our agenda for today will include federal funding opportunities, allowable uses of those funds, and our panel discussion. Be sure to stick around for the closure and survey link at the end, especially if you're wanting CEU information. Our webinar goals today include learning about federal funding opportunities for arts education, including ESSER, and how those funds are distributed, as well as the constraints and allowable uses for them. And then we will hear from a few others as to how their districts are using federal funds to support arts education in North Carolina. We also have a reflection journal if you are watching this recording later to utilize during this session. You will need to make a copy of this journal and take notes throughout and submit that with your survey if you are watching this recording later. If you are here with us live, it is not necessary for you to turn this in because you get credit for being here. We know that you're here. And so just make sure that you take a moment to save that if you are watching this recording later, and start filling that out when you see the little reflection notes at the bottom of those pages. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Brandon.
All right. Thank you, Sayward. So we're going to jump right into what those federal funding opportunities are. And I'd like to introduce to you our first guest, the Director of Public Policy Research and Professional Development for the National Association for Music Education, Leanne Little. Prior to joining the team at NAFME, Ms. Tuttle was the Director of Arts Education at the Arizona Department of Education. She has been the keynote speaker for myriad arts organizations across the country and is a strong voice for arts education across the nation. Beginning in July, she will become the Executive Director and CEO of the American String Teachers Association. Leanne and NAFME led the way, spotlighting how COVID relief funds could assist arts educators addressing learning loss, lowered enrollment numbers, and the purchase of supplies to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. We welcome her now to share her expertise with us.
Thanks, Brandon, and thanks for including me today. And welcome to everyone from North Carolina. And your storms will be headed my way after this is done. So thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. So let's take a moment as we look at this slide and think about the extraordinary investment that your federal government, our federal government, is making in public education through 3 different stimulus packages. The first one, the CARES Act, dates way back to March 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, where about $13 billion came in was sent down to the states and to school districts to support K-12 education. In December 2020, so around the holidays and the switch over to the new year, an additional $54 billion was earmarked for K-12 education in the COVID relief package. And then most recently, the American Rescue Plan that was signed into law in March 2021, so just a few months ago, brought in, this still staggers me, $126 billion for K-12 public education. And these funds are meant to help schools respond to the pandemic in terms of technology needs, PPE needs, equipment needs, sanitation needs, as well as ways to support students as schools reopen. And that was part of the language included in the American Rescue Plan. So it's an extraordinary amount of money. To give you a sense of how large that final amount of money is, if your school receives your school district receives Title I funds, it's about 7 to 8 times their annual Title I amount sitting in that K-12 total. So the number's so big, I have to stop and sort of think about it, put it into perspective. And we'll take a quick look at the next slide of just an example of what those numbers might look like for some of the districts and charter schools here in the state of North Carolina. So at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that there's an attachment from your Department of Public Instruction, and they've done a great job showing what that planning allotment total is per district. So I just did a little screenshot of the very first part of that spreadsheet, but you can go down and see how much money is coming just to your school district. And again, it's not earmarked for arts education by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a substantial investment in education. And so part of the work that your district has been engaging in, and you may have been helping them do this, is to think about how to use those funds most effectively and efficiently to serve the needs of your students during the pandemic and as we come out of the pandemic. Let's go on to the next slide. So what are some of the uses of the funds? I've been talking about this already, right? To help schools implement safe reopening measures and address the academic, social, and emotional needs of students. So we in the arts are obviously included in that academic part because we are part of the academic courses offered to students, both when you think about how statute is set up in North Carolina, and then also at the federal level in the description of a well-rounded education found in ESSA, the Every Student Succeed Act, the main K-12 education act of the federal government. And then the other part, social and emotional needs of students. And again, here's a place where we are part of the solution for our schools. We are probably one of the few sets of subjects where students are welcomed and encouraged to bring their emotions to the forefront in the classroom. And as arts educators, I know that you're spending time with your students, helping them learn how to channel emotions positively and how to address each other and address one another collaboratively in this space. Right? Ensembles don't come together unless everyone's working together collaboratively, and that often means that we're learning how to navigate and negotiate our own needs with those of the collective in the room in our ensemble. So again, we are part of that social emotional glue for a school campus and a school culture. We contribute to a positive school climate, and all of those are parts of what this law is meant to support. So there are definitely, when we think about the pandemic, and certainly from music education, there are specific needs that we have in order for students to come together safely in our schools in the midst of an aerosol-borne virus, right? Things like bell covers, extra masks, masks for performers, perhaps more space, additional instruments so that we're not sharing instruments because that may not be safe any longer. And then think about how our students may have been learning in the arts when we haven't been back in school together, right? That idea that distance learning, while helpful, has not been a replacement for in-person learning in any content area, and certainly for us in the arts. When you think about the skills learned in ensemble, we haven't been able to do that when we've been working individually from our homes. So our students are going to need to accelerate some of their learning as they come back together if they haven't been together in school. And again, these funds can help support that. That could mean additional learning time in the arts or in other subject areas. It could mean additional instruction. So I think in music, we've seen some school districts successfully use these funds to pay for additional private instructors to help students regain their skills on their instruments. And then again, that idea of the fact that we support social emotional learning for our students, and that can be part of how we connect to the use of these funds. Next slide. So this is kind of key to know, because I know for many of us, when we think about federal funds for education, we think about Title I. And if you work in a Title I school, you know that there are many rules associated with the use of Title I funds. And as someone who used to work at a Department of Ed myself in the state of Arizona, I oversaw Title I funds in the state of Arizona. And I know that there are a lot of restrictions on how those funds can be used. With that said, while these funds, ESSER funds, are the stimulus funds are funded and allocated based on the Title I funding formula, they are not Title I funds. Therefore, the normal Title I funding rules and restrictions, the ideas of supplement, not supplant, aren't in play. Instead, districts have a lot of flexibility about how these funds can be spent, so long as they connect to the fundable allowable activities. And there are 16 allowable activities under ESSER funds, and I think you'll find many places where music and arts education can be supported through those fundable activities. Next slide. So to begin with, if you are working in a school district where you have used Title I-A funds or Title II-A funds for professional development as an arts educator, or Title IV-A funds to support a well-rounded education, including music and arts education, all of those things that you've funded through those funding streams could be funded through ESSER funds. So part of what the law says is anything that would be fundable under an existing federal education law can be funded through these funds, right? As I mentioned before, things that could help you mitigate the spread of COVID-19 or the coronavirus within your classroom, all of that is fundable out of these funds as well. So bell covers, masks, other personal protective equipment, that idea of additional instruments or sheet music so students don't have to share, so we're keeping them socially distanced, all of those things could be paid for out of these funds. Next slide. In addition, you can help and think about training that you might need as an arts educator to make certain that you and your students are using the safest protocols possible as we come back together. Particularly the pandemic is still going on strong in your community. So there's some examples here, and I'll put all of these at the link once I'm done, or in the chat for you. These links all in the chat for you once I'm done speaking. But these reopening guidance and guidelines that we were fortunate enough to do with our colleagues at the National Federation of State High School Associations talk about ways to organize your classroom to make it safe, and protocols that you may want to follow. And if you need to have professional development to learn how to do that together with your colleagues that are arts educators in your school district. That again, that time that you're spending to learn can be paid for out of these funds. Sanitizing instruments or other things that students are going to touch and figuring out what that best practice is and paying for that, that can be paid for out of these funds. And of course, the need for staying connected via technology. So if you have students who may still be joining you in an online environment next school year, or, and I'll just put it this way, heaven forbid, we all need to go back and have a school closing because of the pandemic, and you need equipment and software and hardware for students to connect with you, all of that can be paid for out of these funds. And I mentioned this already, and I'll give you a specific example. I know of the school district in Bowling Green, Kentucky. At that high school, this summer and into the fall, they're going to be using ESSER 3 funds to pay for additional instruction, specifically for the band program. So the band director will be able to pay for additional private instruction for all of the band students who need to get their skills up. Because they haven't been coming together as a band for this last school year. And he'll be able to pay those private instructors out of ESSER 3 funds. I was just talking to John Strobe in Kentucky, and he shared that story with me. And in addition, think about materials that you might need to set up your classroom so that it is as effective and efficient as it can be for social distancing if that's still required in your school. And P.S., by the way, if you've done any of these things I've been talking about, sanitizing instruments, purchasing additional instruments, purchasing bell masks and bell covers and additional masks for your students when they're playing their instruments, particular masks for singing. If you've purchased all of that prior using school funds that didn't come out of the stimulus pot, you can actually retroactively use ESSER funds to pay for those. And again, your school district may have already done that through the earlier rounds of ESSER funding from the CARES Act back in March of 2020 or the funds from December 2020. So if you've had those bills build up and come out of your local band budget or choir budget or dance budget, feel free to reach out to your administrator and see if those could be reimbursed through the ESSER funds. So how do you access these funds? Is there like an application you can fill out as an arts educator? And the answer to that is no, not really. These are funds that come to your school district. And so your school district will be the one responding to your state to say, this is our plan. This is how we're going to make use of these funds to support the students throughout our school district. So there is a magical person or set of people at your district who are your federal programs manager or federal programs directors. These are the folks that handle the Title I funds for your school, as an example. And chances are they're the ones who'll be pulling together the plan or have already pulled together the first version of the plan to submit to the state to get approved for funding. So they're the folks you want to get to know if you don't know them already. Chances are your principal or administrator knows them, or if you have a district music or arts supervisor, they probably know them as well. So think about who you know who might know this person and see if you can get involved. So you want to say, how can I participate in the planning process around the allocation of these funds? How can I be part of the solution moving forward so that we make certain that all of our students have a great time and have an opportunity to access arts education as we come back together in the fall. And please, when you're thinking about this, please be specific in your requests. Figure out what you need, how it might connect to those fundable activities, and come with some ideas, right? And this is a really lovely thing to think about too, which is something that boy, I can't wait for the summer to officially start so I can do this as well, which is taking time to think strategically. So while these funds are coming down quickly to school districts and school districts are needing to respond and figure out what their plan is, these funds are available for the next several years. And so I invite you to take some time and think strategically about what you need for your program as you try and rebuild, as you try and support your students coming back to school in the fall. Where do you want to go? And what students might have been missing out? And what students might be missing from your programs? How do we engage them? How do we invite them back in? So instead of just reacting, which is what I feel like we've had to do for the last year and a half, this might be a time where you get to plan and think ahead. And again, who in your district might be engaged in that kind of planning and thoughtful thinking and strategic thinking right now? And enjoy that. That feels kind of luxurious, doesn't it, to take some time to plan? But I think these funds give us the opportunity to do so. And again, even if you don't get funded for what you're planning for, I think taking that time to think creatively right now will help us build better programs for the fall. And just in case you're wondering what the federal government thinks of all this, and yeah, Lynn, this sounds great, but you're an advocate and you're going to tell us that all of this can support arts education. I'm not the only one saying it. So is the U.S. Department of Education. They had guidance that came out just last Thursday. And in that guidance, which was a set of frequently asked and answered questions relating to ESSER and GEAR, which are funds that come to your governor's office dealing with education, the U.S. Department of Education stated, and I quote, an LEA, that's just a fancy term for local education agency or school district, might also address the needs of students arising from the COVID-19 pandemic by using ESSER and GEAR funds to implement or expand arts programs, including purchasing instruments. So there you go. The U.S. Department of Education is suggesting that this is one of the ways in which these funds can be spent. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Sayward?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. That was fantastic. Thanks for all of that wonderful information. Quickly, we are going to just do a little reflection check-in. So I want you to think or write down 3 things. One thing that maybe you already knew that we talked about, one thing that you're wondering, and one thing that you learned. And you can share any or all of those in the chat with us with a K, W, or L. So something you knew, something you wondered, and something you've learned.
I didn't have my royalty-free music ready this time. Sorry, y'all. We'll just enjoy the quiet.
Well, they're starting to come in. So let's see. Something you learned, the quote from the Department of Education. Excellent. There's something you knew. Knew there were 3 tiers of funding. Knew there was money for instruments, wondering how to get reimbursed, and learned that there is money for private lessons. Knew that funds are available for the arts, wondering how we convince our districts to use them, and learned accessing the district staff Title I person. Excellent. Lots of great stuff in here. You can keep reading through that. Yeah, Brandon?
I was just going to share, I know we'll talk about it in a minute, but remember that arts people and federal funding coordinators use different words. Things like private lessons become tutoring. All right.
So now we will talk a little bit about the allowable uses for these funds. So most PSUs have actually already submitted their plans for funds. However, they have categories that those funds have been chosen for or allocated for specific areas. So we know that when requesting funds, they must meet the criteria of one of 3 things. And these are really key. And we've spoken to the director of federal programs at DPI actually, and she said that that is what they are looking for when approving applications. They have to meet one of these 3 things, that they either prevent COVID, respond to COVID, or reduce the spread of COVID. So one of those three things must be in every area or category. And they look really hard at, are these things reasonable and necessary? So those are really the key conversations and the key questions. So be sure that you're asking those things when you're making requests or suggestions, that they fit all of that criteria. So with that, we have a few examples. You know, like we just said, a lot of schools or PSUs have already requested the funds. So if your PSU requested funds, for example, for PPE or for individual student materials, can you see where your arts ed needs might fit into those categories? So for example, for PPE or individual student materials, you could purchase or be reimbursed for bell covers, singers' masks, or individual art kits. Those would all fall under those same categories. If your PSU requested SEL support, for example, you could see where you can get involved with that program by serving the SEL needs of the students through the arts. We've already had several webinars on that topic that you can go back and watch and get more ideas to take to your school or district to really show how the arts would support that program specifically. And we have a link there for our SEL and the arts education guidance documents so that you can really see those clear connections between those areas and take that to show anyone that you need for more support. It may be that your PSU has already requested funds for student enrichment or summer programs, and the arts are another great way to fit under those categories as well. If you want to know more about or more information directly from the federal funding program at DPI, this is their website. So you can go and look at all of these different categories and find out a lot more information directly from that website through DPI. All right, I'll turn it over to Brandon now.
All right, so again, Lynn shared with us that there are 16 uses, and I will say that that is a recent development, that up until recently there were 15 uses. So,
I know the 16th came out like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And so we were operating in North Carolina underneath 15 uses for a long time. So you may find that difference in your local PSU. And instead of reading them all, I'm going to go ahead and let you know that you can read them and hand this off to Nate McGahey from Arts NC. Nate.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brandon. And I know that we have been working well together, that you are pronouncing my name correctly without even struggling now. So thank you so much for that. I just want to say, I'm the Executive Director of Arts North Carolina. And one of the great honors of that role is that I get to work with the Arts Education Leadership Coalition, which is really a coming together of all those organizations that represent educators throughout the great state of North Carolina. And that group meets on a wide variety of issues. Last year, you might remember, we created the recommendations for arts education as schools reopen. And this year, as we head into ESSER, a lot of those great minds got together and took those 15 reasons and created this document. So we might have to come out with an updated document with 16 reasons. But this document is not just a listing of the 16 uses, but also some examples, some real world examples that meet those guidelines that the PSUs have put into their state proposals. So a lot of those things Lynn talked about, I'm not going to go into excessive detail, but I do encourage you to check out the recommendations for acceptable uses of ESSER 3 funding that was put together by education leaders all across the state in a variety of disciplines: dance, band, strings, chorus, music, theater, and visual arts as well. So a lot of great minds got together to put that document together. Also check out our Arts NC ESSER blog page. We're using that right now as a hub for all the ESSER links and information and national resources that are available as you navigate this process. Bernie, you want to go to the next slide? So there are many organizations. A lot of those you may have heard of, or they may represent your particular arts discipline. And I encourage you to check out the one and find the toolkit or the video or the blog post that works best for you. But there's a lot of information out there about how to understand ESSER, why it's important to have these conversations, why it's important to find that person that is dealing with the federal funding in your school district and start a relationship. And remember, advocacy is not political. Advocacy is about relationships and having conversations. So it's very important to make sure that the arts are part of that conversation and that you're building the relationship with the decision maker. If you're worried you're going to miss the boat on ESSER, I would say go ahead and start this conversation now, because President Biden just submitted a budget with a 40% increase in education spending. So there are other federal uses, there are other federal funding that might happen in the next year and the year after. And also, to reiterate what Lynn said, there's time to strategically think about this funding and planning and how you're going to utilize these ESSER funds. So please take some time and do the research and make those connections to the right person in your district.
Thank you, Nate. I appreciate that.
Hmm.
All right.
You
Sayward, I think you're actually leading this. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you again, Nate, for joining us. We always love having you here with us. So we're going to reflect one more time, and this one's a little bit different. We're looking for A, C, or T. So an aha moment so far from the webinar, something that might be a challenge for you and something that you will try. And you can list one or all of those. Share those quickly in the chat with us if you think of them.
And as we do that, I'm actually going to go back and drop into the chat the document I realized I forgot to share. There you go.
Good. We see lots of people saying they're going to try something, try to connect with federal funds person in their district tomorrow. Fantastic. Try integrating more of the arts using our federal funding. Challenge of how to find the contact person in my county. Recommendation. The recommendations document Nate just shared. Fantastic. All right, great. Keep them going. We're going to move forward one more time and get started with a panel discussion, and Brandon's going to introduce our first guest.
All right, if you are a regular, you probably know this face. Mr. James Doherty needs no introduction, but he is the Arts Education and Distance Learning Specialist in Davidson County Schools, and also works with NCMEA and NAFME as well. He is an expert in Title IV Part A, at least in North Carolina, and I'm looking forward to hearing all what he has to share with us today. Thank you, James, for being here.
Thank you, Brandon and Sayward. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be with this great panel of folks that are collaborating to help support students, and certainly to see what we can do to help one another and find the funds available. For the discussion part of what I wanted to share today is really just some steps about how you can advocate even more effectively for federal funds, whether it be Title IV Part A or the new ESSER funding. So I've got some bullet points there. Not going to read every one of them per se, but just kind of going down through. I mentioned several times being proactive rather than reactive. And to me, it's very important that you use data to drive the decisions that you're going to bring to your board or to your federal programs person, probably your principal and local folks first. There's been some great webinars this spring by a lot of different people about how to collect data. Not that I'm promoting any one person or anything, but Scott Lang did a really great job in presenting some information to how to collect data for arts programs. Band, I think particularly was his focus, but that kind of data is really critical. So when we looked back at what was presented earlier about the three aspects of getting ESSER funding, essentially had to be some sort of impact from COVID. If you are an instrumental teacher and you know that you need more instruments, going in and just saying you need more instruments is not really the most effective way to do that. You need to be proactive by gathering data by actually saying, I have 10 bass clarinet students and I only have 4 bass clarinets. We know they should not be sharing instruments due to COVID, so we need this many so that there is no cross-contamination and no risk of possible effects of any illness, not just COVID, and that we mitigate as fully as we can, because we certainly don't want any parents questioning, when you start throwing out comments like that, you're really advocating for what you need to do and being very proactive because you're preventing possible problems. The second bullet in knowing key stakeholders, again, that's knowing who's making the decisions with federal funding at each district. And it was mentioned earlier that districts had to turn in their plans, but I do want to remind everyone that's joining us today that even though districts turned in plans, there were a lot of, we plan to use X number of dollars to support the arts, because they thought they may be doing that, but they didn't know exactly what they were going to do. And so a lot of districts have requested money, but they haven't really decided how they're going to spend that in the district. It was a very broad plan that was turned into DPI. So make sure that you are still willing to have that conversation. And just as a side note, a lot of you are either finished with school or you're getting ready to finish school. Most of school administrators right now are completely buried in finishing the school year and starting the summer learning program. I say a great idea for you would be, could I make an appointment to see you maybe the middle or end of June? Let the dust settle a little bit in the end of this year, let them get their feet wet with the summer learning, and they could probably sit down and talk to you middle to end of June and be with a fresher mindset to look at your needs. And that goes for the school level principal all the way up through the district folks, because they're all really bogged down. There's a lot happening at the last minute here. So the other thing is understanding the timelines for local finance and budgeting. Know when your federal programs coordinator has to have information into the system, the narratives and descriptions, and offer to help write those narratives, because there is wording. You have to talk about what you're going to do and then how you're going to measure it. And I think one thing to point out, and I was on a call, an ALF call with NAFME the other night, that we're kind of forgetting a little bit with ESSER, is our local and state level officials are going to ask us, so you want to use this funding, what are you going to use it for? How are you going to evaluate if it's effective? And then, there's going to have to be some documentation in there. So you really need to do a needs assessment. And if you've done a needs assessment before you ever go to these folks and ask for something, that data that you've already collected is great. And they can utilize that and help put that into the plan. I've got a sample needs assessment there. The greatest advice that I would say with any of you that you need with a needs assessment is make sure your data shows what you need. So if you know you need 10 bass clarinets, then collect data that shows you need 10 bass clarinets. I even heard of a story where one orchestra director wanted a harmony director, which doesn't seem to quite fall in some of these areas, but the orchestra director used some data from some of the most talented students in the program where they were having issues matching pitch. And the orchestra director showed that the harmony director could help match pitch, considered this a loss in learning because they were not in school to do it, therefore justified it. So be very creative. If you have data that shows, and by the way, the teacher, I think, used musictheory.net to do some things and collected the data from there to show that the scores of the very advanced students were lower than they should be. So again, collecting data is very important. Be sure when a needs assessment, you include all art stakeholders and grade levels. You want to make sure you include everybody in your district. Having a plan to evaluate. The other thing that's really important to me, and I know Lynn will agree with this, collect success stories when things are going well. Ask teachers and students, what did you get out of this? Take pictures. And then you can use those stories with your leadership, with your school board, with elected officials, and share with them. I've got 16 pages of stories I collected last spring, and we've used those very effectively. So make sure you're doing that. Use social media to thank local board members for every little win you get, your superintendent. And, in our district, we used some Title IV money this year to purchase instruments. And there's lots of things that went out in social media or will be going out about that. And then as much as we want to complain about what we don't get, always praise what you are getting, because it's easier to get more when you keep praising for what you are getting. And I know in some situations that may not be a lot, but the praise does work. So I hope these points help, and I'm certainly glad to help anyone that needs some ideas or has questions. So thank you.
Thank you, James. And of course, most of the things that James spoke to apply for looking at Title IV Part A funding in the regular funding cycle as well. So those are all just really great things to be thinking about in every year, right, James? Awesome.
And I noticed Laura put in the chat that her federal funds director said we needed to say what we have, what we need, and why we need it. What she presented was more like a wish list, and she talked about the narrative. So thank you for articulating that, Laura. And that is so true, because we know when you have to put it in the system, they have to do all these things. So if they don't have that information, it's going to get bypassed. So you've got to have all that critical information there in order to be considered. And even if the district wants to give you money, they still have to put it in there, what they're doing. So you need to collect that in advance.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, we're going to skip a little bit further east and visit Guilford County with Leanne Little, who is the K-12 Supervisor of Fine Arts. Welcome, Leanne.
Thank you. So I think a lot of what I will talk about will piggyback off of what James has just said. And so in Guilford County Schools, Dr. Contreras, who is our superintendent, has pushed our thinking when spending and allocating ESSER 2 and 3 funds. And our focuses are on eradicating racial wealth gaps. And that means that the cost of materials used in the fine arts are cost prohibitive. The fine arts typically are not accessible for those in lower income brackets. And so what we are focusing on are getting those expensive materials into the hands of students and schools who may not typically be able to afford them. So like James said, if you have 4, I'm going to say flutes because I'm a visual artist, and you need 20, you're lacking. We shouldn't be sharing at this moment. So we did in Guilford do a needs assessment for instruments. So how many do you have and what would you need? And then we looked into the future of what would you need to have a perfect program. So looking forward 3 to 5 years, what do you need? So we did a needs assessment in Guilford back when we left in March of 2020 to figure out the digital needs of our teachers too. So our current plan is that we have funds to provide 2 art specialists for each summer school site. And if you don't know about the size of Guilford County Schools, we have 126 schools. We will have 1 summer school site at every elementary school, every 6 through 8 school. So that's 68 plus 22, and every comprehensive high school. But we're providing 2 art specialists for each summer school site. And that doesn't mean that it's just music and art. We've also included theater and dance because that's a lot of teachers, and we really had to beg, and we're paying very well to have teachers for the summer. So with ESSER 2 and 3 funds, we're doing that. Currently, with the push of thinking outside of the box and meeting the needs of students who may not have regular access to the arts, the district is looking at purchasing a mobile arts bus. That's 1 bus that could bring the arts into a school. It could bring it into a neighborhood. It could bring it into a community center. We haven't really decided what that looks like yet. But that is one, I think, a really out of the box way of thinking of spending these funds and bringing access to our students. Of course, there's funds for instruments. We're not saying the dollar amount, but these instruments will be purchased based off the needs assessment. And we have revisited this assessment several times to make sure that we are not wasting money, that these instruments are instruments that will be used next year and the years to come. So the needs assessment is really important. I did make a copy of James' assessment so that I can use it in the future. We also have a pot of funds for professional development and curriculum resources. So we were able to purchase digital resources for our teachers last year that included smart music, the Art of Ed, which our art teachers love. If you don't have something for your visual art teachers, the Art of Ed, it offers professional development, lesson plans, like learning packs to help like guide an idea, maybe based off identity, or it could be based off a medium. It's really awesome. I do not get any kickbacks for that. I just love it. We are also looking at this thing called Digital Theater Plus for our theater folks, and it also ties in with ELA. And there's a lot of Shakespeare focus for the high school folks. So if you haven't thought of something for theater, that's something. And we're working on finding a digital resource for our dance teachers. So if anyone has suggestions, throw it in the chat. I would love to look at them. So we're doing that. And with this pot of fund, we can also provide professional development. So we have continual like feedback forms. What do you need? What can we get you? Do you have suggestions? Who do I need to reach out to type things? And then we also have funds for marching band uniforms over the next 3 years because ESSER funds end, I wrote it down. I think it's September 30, 2024. So
That's correct.
Our marching band uniforms, we have some schools whose uniforms are 20 years old. So that could potentially be a parent and a student sharing the same uniform. So we focused on that. Guilford also broke down the needs based off a re-entry committee that met in the fall, and then we met again in the spring to talk about what are our highest needs, how are we going to address these racial wealth gaps, and we came up with 7 priorities. And the arts, just so that you know, we decided that they fit under priority 1, which is accelerating learning, and that's kind of where we have our mobile bus where we can meet students where they are to get them the extra, I like the word of tutoring. And then we're also in priority 4, which is invest in instructional materials and resources. And that's where we're looking at materials, supplies, and professional learning, instrument replacement, and band uniforms. All of that fit under that bucket. And of course, this is like ever growing and ever changing. Like James said, like nothing is set in stone, which is really nice that we can say these are our buckets. And this is what we're thinking now, but we may find out in 2022, 23 that it's not a need anymore. We need to change our need.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I appreciate that. And in the chat, we've got some links and some chatter about the Art of Education and the Online Professional Development for Arts Educators, which is the ODPI at the National Dance Education Organization. So also, I know that our own NCDEO provided several ideas in Nate's document presented earlier on. So fantastic. Jeremy Tucker, who is the arts director for K-12 arts education within Durham Public Schools, isn't able to be with us today. But I just wanted to highlight some of the ways that he actually ended up using the comprehensive arts education framework to outline how they were going to use ESSER funds within Durham Public Schools. So they are ensuring, as Guilford County is doing, that there's a music and visual art teacher at all 10 summer learning sites. They are ensuring that dance and theater facilities are updated properly, HEPA filters and all of the COVID mitigation strategies. There is software provided to the teachers within the content areas, and that's all within arts education. Looking at arts exposure, looking at all of the opportunities that were lost across the year and ways that they can partner with community organizations over the summer and throughout the coming year to make up for that. And then also looking at arts integration, my favorite being the last one, which is arts-focused intervention at elementary sites. So do feel free to reach out to Jeremy if you have any questions about these strategies that Durham Public Schools are using to approach the use of ESSER funds. His contact information is there, and you can look over the rest of it at your leisure. And Sayward is going to chat a little bit about what to do if you have no art director in your county.
Yeah, so what do you do if you don't have an arts director for your district? Who do you go to? Well, just to let you know, we've had several districts reach out to us specifically who do not have designated arts coordinators, but instead they're curriculum directors. Maybe they're a K-12 curriculum director, or maybe it was just elementary, specifically reached out to us, Brandon and I, asking how they could utilize ESSER funds to support arts programs within their district. So many of them are receiving ESSER funds for student enrichment or for summer programs, just like you heard some of the other examples, and they want to provide teachers with pay, of course, during the summer. And so they want to be able to provide that. And so they reached out with some of those examples, or providing arts kits for summer programs, or things leading into the school year that maybe they could add a role or a person, an arts teacher, even if it's only a temporary position, but to really help utilize that while they have the opportunity. So we really felt like that was important to share with you, that some of these curriculum directors that do not have arts coordinators are thinking about the arts, and they are already having it on their radar and trying to reach out. So that's something that you could also do, is to reach out to maybe other people within your district, your curriculum directors. It was mentioned earlier, just some of the various people that you could try to reach out to connect. Some of these curriculum directors are really seeing that the arts are necessary for the purposes of learning loss from COVID, or for addressing social emotional learning needs for their students. And they're feeling that this is a great way to introduce these for the purposes of helping meet the needs of their students right now, specifically in response to the pandemic. So they're really seeing the value in how the arts can help all of their students. They might be requesting dance teachers, like we mentioned, to teach during summer camps that might also incorporate literacy, for example. So they would combine an art form with literacy or reading and see how that could work together. They might be requesting materials, art kits, like we mentioned as well. And most of these curriculum directors do not actually have any arts experience. They just simply knew that this was something they wanted to tap into and try to build within their district. So be sure that you contact some of these other positions within your district, especially if you don't have an arts coordinator, and see how you might be able to help fit into what they already have allocated or planned. If they aren't thinking about the arts, it's great for you to bring that to their attention, because it might be something that they just haven't even thought of with regard to PPE or with regard to student materials. So that includes learning materials for arts classes as well. So you might be able to help them to get some ideas that they didn't even think of before. All right, so we have just a few minutes. We're gonna go ahead and allow you to ask some questions. If you have any questions, you can put those in the chat. We will finish up with a little reflection in just a moment. So if we don't get to everyone's questions, we will stick around at the end, and we will also turn off the recording at some point. So if you prefer to ask questions after that point, then you can do that as well. If you have a question that you'd like to put in the chat, you can do that. Or if you have one that you would like to ask out loud, you can send us a message, and we will let you know.
And we also know that there might be people here who would love to share unfortunately we're running low, but if you have a 30 to 60 second quip about how your PSU or LEA is supporting Arts Ed with ESSER funding, we'd love to hear that as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let us know in the chat. Like, I'd like to share what my district is doing, and we can give you a moment to share that.
Three years is great. And if you can figure out another funding stream. Oh, let me read this question and we can have everybody pitch in.
Yeah.
I've been told that we can't get Quaver with ESSER funds because it's not sustainable after 3 years. So what angle do you take?
Well, it was, I think that was in response to Wendy saying we just purchased Quaver with ESSER funds. And so Laura was asking how she was able to do that.
Hi, this is Wendy. I thought it'd be easier than me just typing in the chat.
That's great.
We actually bought the 5-year license, and we're using the ESSER funds based off of the digital piece as well to be able to incorporate the digital curriculum along with the face-to-face curriculum when we come back next fall. And that's kind of the approach that we've used. And also the detriment that COVID has left our students with in music, and being able to build that back up is another basis of how we used it. Hope that helps.
Yeah, and James mentioned that you could see if they can transition to Title IV to pay for Quaver after the ESSER is depleted. So see if they could transition to that after that. And the other Wendy says we purchased it as a 1-year subscription with the Title IV funds, and it is a line item for those same funds for next year. Christine shared we purchased bell covers with the ESSER funds. We purchased digital curriculums with the Title IV-A rollover, but she thinks it will come out of ESSER for the next 3 years. Shannon shared our first ESSER funds were used for singer masks, band masks, and bell covers. And I see more examples: Smart Music, Sight Reading Factory, Deep Space, Sparkle memberships. We purchased Sight Reading Factory for chorus and Smart Music for band. These are great examples, everyone. Go ahead and keep sharing if you like, but we're gonna move on to our optimistic closure for today. So we're gonna do some ACEs. You're gonna choose one of these 4 things to answer in the chat, and be sure to tell us which one you're answering. So for diamonds, what are some gems of wisdom that you gathered from the people or content shared with us today? For the hearts, what's something from the heart? How are you feeling right now? And for spades, what new ideas did you dig up today? What are you thinking about as far as a new idea? And then finally, for clubs, what ideas, thoughts, or points of view grew for you today? Maybe they were a little seed that started and they've now blossomed and grown from today's webinar. Please feel free to choose one of those. You are welcome to share more than one if you'd like, and share your answer with us in the chat for us all to see. Heart, love to hear that districts are including funding for the arts, even if not knowing specifically how to yet. Yes, fantastic. Spades, needs assessments for my teachers so I can document what is needed. Yeah. Heart, Anna shared, I'm feeling optimistic that I may be able to present requests to my county with data and get some of the things needed for my program. Yeah, and Chuck shared, it's great to hear that it's working elsewhere and gives me hope for our district. Great. Love hearing the ideas of how PSUs are using funds. Love the art bus idea. Stephanie shared, I like the Art of Education website to use as a resource for myself as an art educator. Kimberly, suggestions on how funds can be well spent. And Laura Hart, she is grateful for sharing time.
Well, thank you very much. Keep sharing if you'd like. Definitely, please read your colleagues' responses. They are fantastic. And here in the chat, we will drop the survey link for today. If you have been here today, again, you don't have to. You can just simply put attended live in the link or in the question that it asks you to share your reflection journal. If you are watching this as a recording, please do share your reflection journal in that part of the survey. And you should receive a certificate of participation in your email within the next 24 hours. And if you do not, please let me know. We are aware that some of the firewalls on some of your LEA's email addresses don't allow us to use our automated system. And so I can pull that down and send it directly to you if you would like. So thank you so much for being here today. I am going to end the live stream and the recording.
So again, if you have